Episode 15 of the BTB Project. I remember the day as if it were yesterday. I was a senior in college, playing the best tennis of my life, and I was in the best shape of my life before everything changed. I went from training for the spring season to a hospital bed. The truth is, I hurt my back my senior year, which led to an MRI that found something far greater than the injury I had. I walk you through the story of having a tumor in my spinal canal that almost changed the entire trajectory of my life. You'll be inspired by my story, and let's get into it.
Don't be afraid of the dark. Be careful with stars. Not every light is gonna guide you.
Welcome to the BTB Project, designed to empower listeners to identify their why and to live their best lives no matter the circumstances. My name is Kollman Gearhart. A former athlete and motivational coach, I've had the opportunity to inspire thousands through my story and help accomplish what they are built to be. You'll be encouraged by each and every episode, and let's get into it.
Yeah, when I blow up, I'ma soar high like Peter Pan. In real life, be living all my dreams. If I'm waking up, it's in a foreign land.
One of the questions that I get asked often when I am still teaching or competing in tennis is, what's going on with your racket, man? That thing, I've never seen anything like that before. And for a while, I was pretty self-conscious about it because, yes, it is a unique racket, but the story of why I used it was something that a lot of people didn't understand or resonate with. So I play with a two-handled tennis racket, and the racket is actually developed by a old patent that was in China that was then bought by two brothers here in the United States, Brian and Dan Battistone, and they developed a racket that essentially created more leverage when you're hitting your tennis shots. Because typically with a racket, you can use one handle to create force, but if you had two handles, you'd be able to push and pull to create force at the same time. And with that, it created a lot of stability. You had to use your whole body, and it was kind of an interesting concept. But what does a two-handled tennis racket have to do with a tumor that was found in my back when I was a senior in college? Well, I had to relearn how to have balance and stability in my body. And it makes me go back to that day that I woke up into a situation that changed me for the rest of my life. That day was up in Loveland, Colorado, where a couple days prior, I was playing my last ever collegiate tennis match after hurting my back and finding out that through multiple MRIs and evaluations that there was a tumor called a schwannoma, which is a neurosheath tumor that was inside of my spinal canal that had to be removed immediately. And it was in that moment that I realized, how did I get into this situation? And it was interesting to think of all of the things that I had done and accomplished to that point. You know, being in the best shape of my life, playing Division I college tennis. And in an instant, I wake up in a hospital bed and it all had been taken away. In a lot of my previous podcasts, I shared the story about goals and success and, having these moments of triumph, right? And there I was, not only a few years after accomplishing a lot of goals that I wanted to accomplish, not being able to move in a hospital bed. And that's an awful, frightening thing to experience. It was lonely. It was sometimes embarrassing, which I'll get into later. But to have everything taken away like that, it made me question a lot. It made me question, well, what's my future going to be like? Am I going to be able to have kids growing up? These are all things that were walking through my mind after having this surgery. So I want to get into a little bit about what was discovered in my back and just some, kind of general statistics and understanding of the condition that I inherited. When I hurt my back my senior year, I had a bulging disc located in my lumbar spine near my L4, L5 vertebrae, so pretty close to my lower back. And when I went in to get the MRI, I was obviously very uncomfortable because you have to sit still for a solid 45 minutes to make sure that the image quality comes through clean. And I just remember going through that MRI, and the nurse that pulled me out of the tube after the image had a pretty concerned look on her face. And what I've learned with medical images is that the nurse or the medical professional who's performing the image can essentially see what's going on as the images are being taken. Now, that doesn't quantify them to be a doctor or to give a formal medical diagnosis, but what I do know is that concerned look on her face made me very concerned about what life was going to be like for me after that MRI. And I remember the doctor that I went to go visit, Dr. John Viola, who recently retired from his medical practice out in Florida when he relocated. But this was back in, 2008, and he had an office up in Loveland called Front Range Brain and Spine. And that day that I went in for that appointment, it was really the worst case scenario of, walking into a room about to receive a diagnosis that you don't understand, you can't comprehend, and everything changed for me. So when I went into that office, I was there with my dad, and he put a screenshot image of my back on a screen. And on this image, he said, "You absolutely have hurt your back. But the reason why you're here today is because we found a tumor that is in the same area of where your image was taken in your lower back. And that tumor appears to be connected to your spinal cord between your L4 and L5 vertebrae. That tumor is large enough to where we have concerns about your ability to walk, to maintain a normal life, to use the bathroom correctly, because all the nerves that come from that area of the spinal cord are tied to, as I mentioned, everything from leg mobility to bowels and bladder to, hip mobility. A lot of those things were compromised with this tumor in my back. The medical name for the tumor is called a schwannoma. A schwannoma is a, fortunately, benign, meaning non-cancerous growth that can occur inside of the nervous system. So the nerves in the spine have what they call a protective layer, which is the dura. And the dura is encapsulated with spinal fluid that protects your spinal cord. So inside of the dura and on the spinal cord was this growth. And I went from being an elite athlete a few days before to being told that I would need emergency surgery to remove this growth before it causes more issues in my body. And I just remember seeing that image with my dad, this ball in the middle of my back that was glowing, because I had to have another image that picked up active cells in the body, which typically can be cancer, and it illuminates the image so that doctors or nurses can see these types of growths without having to search too hard. And to absorb that moment, to see that image, I was devastated. I was crying. I was scared. I didn't know why this happened or how it happened. But it made me, I guess I would say, bitter that all of these things that I was able to do, the journey of accomplishing one of the biggest goals of my life, was taken away in just a heartbeat. And the challenge for me is the doctor assured me that the surgery was not going to have many complications. And as we started doing the research, my dad and I found that these schwannoma tumors are found 1 out of every 10,000 MRIs. So if you're thinking about like winning the wrong type of lottery, those who get a cancer diagnosis or, any sort of trauma to their body that they have to overcome that diagnosis. That's what I was sitting in. And it was very challenging. So we started to learn how this could have happened. Now, schwannoma tumors can grow anywhere in the body. And there will be moments in this episode that you'll learn about the multiple tumors that I had in my body. But this one in my back, it's pretty rare that they end up in your back. More often than not, these tumors are associated with areas of the brain, because the brain is connected to the super pathway of your body, your cerebellum and everything down that connects to the spinal cord. There's a lot of nerve tissue to where these growths can happen. So the definition of a schwannoma is basically a cluster of overactive nerve cells that respond to your body's normal rhythm per se. And instead of creating, new normal nerve cells, they cluster in these large groups to create these masses. Although there's not much information about the genetics to how these grow or why they grow, more importantly, what I learned is that it is not uncommon that somebody who has a significant amount of weight loss, that your body can actually respond neurologically to create these clusters and these tumors throughout your body. So I never thought that I would ever be in a situation that, because I was trying to take a more healthy, proactive approach to my life and my body and my goals, that it could create overactive nerve cells. And so having that understanding and baseline knowledge of what this was, I then a few days later had to face the surgery. And that surgery, as I mentioned, the doctor said, yeah, you're going to be in and out, almost an outpatient surgery, he said, where I didn't even have to go to the hospital to have it performed. And I come to realize that all of that being said by Dr. Viola was to help calm me for what I was about to experience. The surgery took a little over 6 hours. How the surgery was performed was essentially I'm laying flat on my stomach, and they cut open my back from probably the middle of my back down to my waist, go inside my spinal column. So they have to remove 2 of the lamina, which is the kind of the tail of each vertebrae at L5, L4. And after removing those, you create a channel to where you can access the dura and the spinal cord. So you take the bone out, you cut the dura, and then you cut the tumor off of the spinal cord. Now let that sink in for a little bit. A doctor cuts a tumor, a knife is used between my spinal cord and the tumor. 6 hours later, when I woke up, it was a whole lot different than what I was sold. I was sold a quick surgery, quick recovery, and I realized that it was going to be far from that. When I had woken up, I had no sensation in my pelvis, and I had complete numbness in my left leg. I began a whole new chapter in my life. I spent a little over 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from this surgery. And it was a battle each and every day, far greater than really anything that I did before my tennis career to accomplish my goal. This was trying to regain mobility and functionality of things that I just had without even thinking about it. I had lost control to my ability to use the restroom. So in the hospital, all of, not so fun things like catheters and bags to help me go to the bathroom. There was no sure sign of if the surgery caused trauma enough to my spinal cord to where that functionality would ever come back. So you have all of these different moments beginning to build in your head of, what I used to have and what I'm currently going through. And it was just a mental battle. And slowly but surely, I was able to work my way up to where I was able to start walking again using a walker. But it was so crazy, the feeling of trying to regain that. I mean, we're talking, my brain knew that my left foot and my right foot needed to alternate to make steps. I knew that. But when my brain was trying to tell my body to do it because of the trauma to the cord and the inflammation from the surgery, I wasn't able to do it. I had what they call a drop foot, meaning my left foot, I wasn't able to lift it. All of the neurological impulses that I was used to having were gone. Through some really good PTs and recovery, I was able to leave the hospital and go back to my apartment that I lived in college. And at this time, I was trying to finish grad school. I was fortunate enough to get my undergrad degree done within a little less than 4 years. So I had one more year of eligibility left to play college tennis. So I opted into going into grad school. And I was, about a year into my graduate studies. And I was trying to finish my degree. I remember being pretty frustrated at the time because the university would not allow me to take the time off, the semester off after this surgery to rest up and heal. That I had been enrolled, and because the semester had already started, I was either going to try to find a way to attend class, or they would fail the classes or coursework that I took for the semester, and they would also charge me for it. Trying to go to class when you're using a walker and wearing adult diapers was not ideal. And I just remember that year how embarrassing it was to try to navigate the social aspects of college, the academic rigor of a graduate program. I'm on these pain medications to help with my recovery, but those pain medications put me in a brain fog to where it was nearly impossible to focus. Typically when I had a lot on my mind or a lot of different things going on, my outlet was always fitness or tennis. And knowing that was gone, and knowing that I was barely able to walk, I had a lot of emotional buildup. And somehow, some way, I was able to make it through all the way to being able to take the final for my graduate program. So I'd passed all the classes, and I had to do a dissertation paper as the last requirement to graduate. And at this point, I was a couple months out of my back surgery. And I remember trying to put together this dissertation. And it was the absolute worst. I wasn't able to focus. I wasn't able to put in my best work. Going to teachers and expressing how challenging it was with managing pain and studying and so on and so forth. And a lot of them didn't have any grace. And looking back, grad school, it's not for everybody. And yeah, I could have been probably a much better student even before my back surgery. But the reason why I was in grad school is because it allowed me to be able to still play tennis. So I get all the way up to this final, and I turn it in, and a week later I get an email. It was from the leader of the graduate program I was in. And the leader of the graduate program said that I did not pass my dissertation, that I was accused of misciting sources, and that not only was I not going to be able to graduate, but that I was no longer going to be part of the graduate program. I was so mad to get that news. Trying to understand, how in the world did I get to this point? How do I develop a tumor in my back? A lot of the things that I've done with the Built to Be project stem from that moment of uncertainty, insecurity, and self-doubt, and figuring out a way to overcome and persevere and drive from it. So after leaving school without that graduate degree, I went on mission to start coaching, to start helping as many people as I can. And it was incredible how my body began to heal. It certainly wasn't the same with my movement and, my left leg. It was hard for me to, kind of push off of the outside of my foot because a lot of those nerve endings from my lower back were damaged during the surgery, which caused, numbness and almost a desensitized part of my foot, to where when you put weight on it, it just doesn't feel the same anymore. And I went through and just had a lot of years of success as a coach. And all of a sudden, everything that I experienced with that tumor began to cause additional side effects that I never thought I would have to overcome. To give you an example of some of the things I was working through, I remember, having follow-up MRIs to make sure that the tumor was no longer in my back, because it is known that these schwannoma tumors can sometimes grow back in the same area that they were removed. And I was very fortunate over, that 2.5 year period after my surgery to have a clean MRI each time. And I remember one day, as I was, teaching a tennis lesson, I had this really bad hand pain coming from the hand that I use with my tennis racket. And I remember looking down, and I started to get this really odd swelling in my middle finger knuckle. And that swelling caused so much pain that it was very hard for me to clench a fist or to grip a tennis racket. And I remember the pain getting so bad that I ended up having to take a few days off. And eventually my right finger knuckle just ended up ballooning. I mean, we're talking about the size of a small crab apple was my middle finger knuckle. I couldn't hold a racket. I couldn't work. It was hard for me to put any weight on my hand. It was a very, kind of hot nerve pain sensation that I had no idea, what was going on. And I remember having to go to urgent care and be put on a 5-day anti-inflammatory just to get the pain out of my hand. And, I ended up getting an x-ray, and I didn't have a doctor really be able to tell me what caused this pain. And eventually I was able to get it to come down. I was able to go back to work, and not even maybe 6 months later, I ended up getting in a minor car accident, and my arm had hit basically the armrest of the car that I was in. And after that accident, everything else was fine. But I ended up a day or two later having that same inflammation in my right hand. This time, because I was in an accident, they were concerned about, my arm and my shoulder, that I might have had, a break or something happened that would have caused that inflammation. So I ended up getting an MRI. And after that MRI, I had that same kind of strange look from the nurse after I came out of the tube. And I knew that I was about to go back on this journey of another tumor. And that's exactly what it was. They found 3 or 4 little schwannoma tumors inside of my brachial plexus, very close to my subclavian vein and a lot of the main arteries and nerves that go from my spinal cord through my neck, through my shoulder, into my right arm. And it wasn't ever diagnosed that the hand pain that it was causing, or the arm pain or the arm weakness, was caused by these tumors impinging the nerves to my arm. But I realized then and there that it was going to be very challenging for me to be able to grip and hold a tennis racket like I used to. And I remember at the time there was a big tournament going on in Colorado called the Colorado State Open. And it was really the top players in the state, and even from folks outside of Colorado who would come in and compete for, open level championships and prize money. And there was a gentleman that showed up from Las Vegas, Nevada, named Brian Battistone. And Brian was a pretty good player, ended up being top 100 in the world in doubles with his brother Dan. And I remember watching this guy play, and he had just the oddest looking game. I know he played collegiate volleyball and had a pretty good vertical, so he could, just absolutely jump off the tennis court. But he was playing with a two-handled tennis racket. And it didn't make sense to me how he used it and, why he used it. But I remember in that moment thinking, man, all this stuff going on with my hands, I'm still teaching full time. I'm wondering if I could try this thing out. And I ended up calling him and his brother after the tournament. I met him briefly there, and he offered to send a few demos back to me here in Colorado to try them. And it was quite the learning curve to go from a regular tennis racket to a two-handled racket that, you know, was almost like an alien spaceship feeling. You know, you don't know exactly what's happening, but it somehow worked itself into a few months later to where I just couldn't stop using it. I loved teaching with it. At any point when I was hitting with clients, I could go to two hands rather than just using one hand. And it took a lot of relief off of my right arm and my right side. And it was interesting because outside of my clients, when I would go out and, you know, as I worked my way back to being able to compete again, I got a lot of interesting questions about the racket that I used, and people kind of looking at me strange or being like, is that thing legal? Like, why would you ever want to play with that? It doesn't make any sense. And yes, it's legal. And, you know, the United States Tennis Association approves it. It's a racket that can be used on the tour. It just caused a lot of interesting conversations and strange looks. Very similar to what I felt when I was overcoming some of my, you know, physical struggles in high school with my weight. And so I had a few years already under me of folks trying to understand and be curious and give me weird looks. And it just didn't matter to me because I felt so comfortable with that racket in my hand. And, you know, over time, I was very fortunate to have a tremendous full-time coaching career, and to this day be able to play with that racket and play at a relatively high level. And it's something that my body has adjusted to and has made really the best out of a situation that has been a pretty big struggle. So knowing that I had those small tumors in my brachial plexus, I had a few other doctors talk to me about it and if surgery was necessary to take out those tumors because of the possible impingement in my arm. And I have yet to have a doctor tell me that it would be wise to have a surgery because there's probably more harm than good that would happen trying to take those out. There's so many moving parts, like I said earlier, in that area of your body where if you're not careful or if something happens, you're causing a lot more harm than good. No different than what happened with the tumor in my back. But that one I didn't have a choice because I had the side effects and the concern from a neurosurgeon that tumor could grow and essentially paralyze me from the waist down. So at that point, I actually had a pretty big transition in my career. I had, started my family and really wanted more time back during recreational hours. So I left full-time coaching, remained a high school coach when I could in the spring, and started my sales journey. And as I was able to make that transition, I was playing less and less tennis, but still utilizing the two-handled racket. And I remember one day, this was when my son actually had a race in New Mexico, and me, my wife, and my son were supposed to wake up early in the morning and drive to New Mexico for this race. And I remember waking up, and this was after, having a workout or a run the day before, and I had slightly tweaked my ankle. And I woke up the next day, and I could not put any weight on my left foot. And my left foot was super swollen. I could move my toes, and I could put weight on my foot, but if I tried to stand and lift my foot to walk, the pain was just insurmountable. I mean, we're talking like pins and needles being poked into the top and bottom of my foot. And it just, I don't know, the listeners, if you've ever dealt with neurological pain, but I've said this before to, my wife and clients that I've helped in tennis. It's like, I would much rather just have a flat out broken bone than to have to deal with nerve pain. And for some unknown reason, again, it came up, but this time it was in my foot. So I went to a neurologist that actually was one that helped me with my hand. And at the time, we just did an x-ray on the foot and went on a 5-day steroid again to get the inflammation down. And it was told to me that it's possible a tumor could be in my leg, but I have not had the opportunity to get an MRI to find out if there's something there. So over the last few years, that same foot inflammation, I've had it a couple other times where my foot will just swell, won't be able to put weight on it. Every time I lift it, it's pins and needles and not much of an answer. And just recently, I actually was able to see a podiatrist to take a look at both my feet. And I was told that I have a little bit of arthritis in the top of my ankle on both sides from competitive tennis that could be causing this same inflammation. But the doctor also said that it's possible that it could be another schwannoma tumor in my leg. Schwannoma tumors are very rare, but also very evasive, and they can end up anywhere in the body. So far, I've had one taken out of my back. I got a few small ones in my shoulder, and I possibly have one in my leg. And as I've been able to manage the inflammation, I haven't bothered doing an MRI to see if one's there, because since, Lord willing, these are benign tumors, you can still have a high functionality. You can still have a relatively normal life, even with these tumors inside your body. So that's where everyone asks me all the time, not just about the two-handled tennis racket I use, but I get a lot of people who ask me why I run so much or jog. I don't run very fast, trust me, but my body is just prone to inflammation, and steady state cardio, outside of just, loving to run, to put a podcast in or listen to an audiobook or music, it has kept the inflammation down in my body. It's allowed me to, continue to coach high school tennis and, play some competitive doubles, and who knows, maybe I'll get back into more competitive singles in 2023, 2024, using that two-handled tennis racket. But the running and diet, being able to stay away from the high inflammation foods has allowed things not to flare up. But as I reflect back, I just am in awe of how my life has been impacted by tumors. And more importantly, as I've been able to overcome them, I've come across former clients, former players, coworkers, people that I've come across in the business world that have shared very similar stories, not necessarily about schwannoma tumors, but, in one of my earlier podcasts, Peyton Palermo, survivor of 6 brain surgeries, being able to overcome that because of these tumors that were growing on her cerebellum. If I didn't go through the trauma that I went through with my tumor, I would have never been able to help someone like her as she was recovering and trying to learn to coordinate again on the right side of her body. Looking at this situation of when I was in that hospital bed and pleading to God, being like, why me? Why me? This was all a plan and a purpose. If these tumors weren't part of my life, I don't know if I would be the coach that I am. I don't know if I'd be the husband and father that I am. But that's the mission of the BTB Project. You're taking something that's a challenge, you're taking some adversity, and you're turning it into a positive. I don't know what life is going to look like in the future. And if something comes up to where I'm in an MRI tube again, and they find another one of these that might require surgery. But at this point, I'm just so thankful for the awareness and understanding of myself, the teachable lessons that this has taught me, that I've been able to help pay forward. And, a tumor does not define what I am and am not able to do. It's just been part of a journey. And that's where I ask you, the listeners, to really think about difficult circumstances, difficult moments where you get the news of a diagnosis, or the bad test score, or you didn't win the match or game that you wanted to, and truly think about, is that failure? Is that something that is the end all be all of what you're trying to do with goals and the journey of your life? Or is it a stepping stone? Is it something that, as I shared in a previous podcast with David Petty, the runner from Wisconsin, are you scooping coals into your fire? Are these difficult circumstances, failure, trials, tribulations, are they just scooping coal into your train to propel you forward? And each and every adverse moment is an opportunity to get better and to grow. One of the greatest quotes that I've heard. It's another one by Eric Thomas. And Eric Thomas is just an unbelievable dynamic speaker. And he talked once about diamonds and how a diamond is made. So diamonds are sand. And when you put that sand under pressure, it creates a stone. But outside of that scientific miracle, what I'm always fascinated by is what makes that diamond shine. That diamond is cut and faceted in multiple different directions, geometrically. And as it's faceted and as it's cut, it creates a shine. Now think about that for a little bit. It takes cuts, it takes any and all difficult circumstances that create beauty and shine in that diamond. So as we wrap up today's episode, tumors are a part of my life, but I look at each and every one of them and each and every failure and each and every step in the road of life as a facet. And that facet has made a diamond shine. As the listener, shine your diamond bright. Impossible's nothing. Each and every one of you are capable of whatever you are built to become. We're going to continue to bring special guests and stories that just will encourage you and inspire you. It's all about just getting 1% better each and every day. Hang in there, keep going. I'm proud of you, and I look forward to the next one.